Hi everyone, this is Dennis Mink from Liftoff, and I am here with Harry Robertson, our CTO, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Harry, would you like to say hi?
Yeah, hi everybody.
So today we are going to take a deep dive into the Mobile App Engagement Index that we launched recently that specifically looks at CPA benchmarks and conversion rates for post-install events. My name is Dennis Mink. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at Liftoff, and Harry is with us. We are live tweeting the webinar, so if you guys are so inclined, if there's anything interesting, please go ahead and share it on Twitter. Just use the hashtag LiftoffMobile. And once again, if you have not seen the report yet, I would encourage you all to download it since this is really what we are digging into today. The URL is here on the screen. And I saw a few of you who logged in have gone ahead and downloaded the report. That's great. And if you haven't done so already, just go ahead and do that. All right, so we're going to just jump straight into this. Harry, how are you?
Good. Excited to be here, Dennis.
Excellent. So we've got some interesting CPA benchmarks that have come out of the report. Registration, we found cost $9.45. A reservation acquired through an app install campaign comes out at $35.11. Why don't you walk us through this? You know, how exactly did we get to these numbers?
Yeah, well, so first of all, with our data science team, we analyzed all of our data spanning kind of customers in many different categories, many different kinds of events. It covered about, I think we had about 10 million installs in our data set for this report, and about 400 million post-install events. So significant volume, and I guess the particularly interesting thing about this data set is that it covers both the kind of classic advertising metrics, the pre-install metrics, so you know the kind of the cost of ad spend, and then also the sort of classic analytics metrics, the sort of post-install engagement metrics. And so by combining those two data sets, that means that we can compute these numbers around CPA, around kind of cost per action, rather than just the standard conversion rates. And so, to show these numbers, which you're seeing right now, the first thing we did early on was classify the kind of all the different kinds of events that occur in all the applications out there into various categories. And of course, every application is different. And even though many apps have sort of some registration or sign-up component, it's slightly different in each application. And so, of course, there's variance within those numbers. But so that we could give a kind of a big picture and allow people who aren't in this data set to sort of draw conclusions from it, we tried to generalize, and we came up with these 5 major event categories: register, share, reserve, purchase, and subscribe. And so I guess just a few things to call out. Firstly, what we looked at for this report are first-time events. So these numbers, which you're seeing here, they're the cost to acquire a user who performs one or more of these events. Or put another way, they're the cost to get a first reservation from a user in your application. And so the cost per event could actually be dramatically lower because, of course, a single user can perform multiple purchases. So if an average user performs 3 purchases, then the cost per purchase is actually 1/3 of this, so maybe $30, for example.
So right. So for example, let's take the reservation numbers here, and use an example. Let's say Uber as our example. The $35.11. This is the cost for a user to install the app through a paid app install campaign, register, put their credit card information in, and then book their first car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, this number isn't specifically for Uber; it's a general number. But yeah, that's right. So it's going all the way through that flow. And I guess another thing to call out is that these numbers are for the campaigns that we're running, which are very heavily sort of CPA optimized campaigns. So, if you're just kind of getting started and you've thrown together some ads and you and you run some money on Facebook or on some ad network, you probably won't see these results unless your application flow is kind of very optimized. You're likely going to kind of have higher CPAs. These are for kind of very optimized campaigns.
Okay. And let's talk about transactional versus non-transactional events. there's clearly some big differences here in costs, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think intuitively, you kind of, one can understand that there's a big difference between requiring a user to, to pull out that credit card and pay versus not. Events like registration and share, they're kind of easier for the user to perform, and they don't have that financial barrier. I mean, especially in the kind of mobile application ecosystem, I think one challenge for building a kind of, building a profitable business is that mobile users have become accustomed to not paying, to getting a lot of content for free, and you have to sort of overcome that. But I'd say that more generally, I mean, payment is one thing, but in general, what we look at and what we see kind of influences these prices the most is the notion of friction. So kind of the more friction there is, the higher the CPA is going to be, and friction covers money, requiring the user to pay, but it also requires time. It's also effort. If you're making it harder, or if it's harder for a user to accomplish a given action, there's just going to be more drop off. The conversion rates are going to be lower, and so the CPAs are going to be higher. And so purchase is usually high friction. You kind of typically have to install, sign up, type in a password, search the catalog, add a credit card, add your address, finally get through to purchase. But interestingly, it's not always that black and white. So in our data set, for example, there are certain apps whose CPA for reservation or for purchase or for subscription was actually lower than the CPA for registration or for sharing of certain other applications, which I think illustrates that if you're able to kind of really lower the friction within your application, then to those transactional events, then you can still get very low CPAs.
Right. Like, for example, I know we talk a lot about lightweight registration as a take your registration process within your app and really streamline it, so the amount of information that a user needs to add in order to start using the app is as little as possible. And that's just an example of one of the things that we recommend doing to reduce friction within the app and thus decreasing the cost per action for new users.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Good. Let's move on. Let's talk about iOS versus Android. So there's some really interesting differences here between iOS and Android users. For example, CPAs for top of funnel events are more expensive on iOS, including registering and sharing. Yet transactional events, reserve, making a purchase, and subscribing are clearly more expensive on Android. How do you explain this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was really one of the most sort of interesting findings that we came across when putting together this report for me personally. Just because, the differences are so stark, just looking at these numbers, registration 23% higher, 23% more expensive on iOS, whereas, purchase 63% higher on Android. So it's sort of this really kind of stark difference between, as you were saying, the transactional events being cheaper on iOS, the non-transactional being cheaper on Android. Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of explaining it, I think the immediate cause is, at least for the non-transactional events, is just that ad inventory is generally a lot cheaper on Android than it is on iOS. And so, if you have an iOS app and an Android app and they both have similar in-app conversion rates, then that means that you're just going to be paying more to show the same number of impressions on iOS, so your CPAs are going to be higher. I think, I guess what's maybe more interesting is sort of the causes for that. I mean, there's a lot of research into this. Kind of iOS users are tend to be more affluent on average, kind of come from more affluent demographics. I mean, there's several reasons for that as well. Like iPhones are just kind of cheaper than Android devices on average. So there's a wide variety of kind of low-end and mid-range Android devices, which is less true for iOS. There's also this just perception that kind of iOS is more premium. And all of that makes iOS typically more attractive to advertisers, including kind of brand advertisers, and that sort of pushes up prices.
Yeah. If I can interrupt, I actually was reading some research last night about around mobile shopping during Thanksgiving, and the research stated that they found that the average amount spent on a purchase by iPhone users was $118.57, while Android users spent an average of $95 on each item that they were purchasing through their phone. So we're talking about a difference of that iOS users were spending on average $23 and change more than Android users were during Thanksgiving.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that tells the same, a similar story there. I think there's the demographics. There's also just the fact that iOS users have become sort of more accustomed, largely thanks to kind of Apple's efforts, to paying. Being willing to take out their credit card, being willing to either like purchase applications up front, or being more willing to kind of make in-app purchases and sort of trust the payments infrastructure. And that's kind of more the case on iOS than on Android. And as a result, typically you get kind of much better conversion rates to purchase or to subscription or to reservation on iOS, which kind of results in this lower CPA, sometimes much lower CPA.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just to stay on that topic for a second, it's really about reducing friction in mobile payments. And there's another study, or it was not a study, but I was reading the other day that the VP of Mobile Commerce at Staples announced that Apple Pay users now account for 30% of all purchases made through the Staples iOS app, making it the #1 payment method in their iOS apps. And apparently all their app users are evenly split between iOS and Android, yet 70% of their mobile revenue is generated by Apple device owners. So I think there's sort of two things here. One is, again, this data speaks to iOS users simply spend more than Android users, which we find in our data as well. And secondly is, I think Apple Pay has the opportunity to really reduce the friction around making payments, since it's just it's as simple as pressing your thumb on the Touch ID in order to make that payment. So I would imagine that as more app developers integrate Apple Pay as a payment solution, that CPAs will go down and revenue will go up.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I wouldn't make it too kind of stark a contrast. I think the hidden variable here that's kind of behind these numbers is also that of scale. So kind of whenever you're thinking about where should I invest money, you've got the question of CPA. So kind of, okay, where can I what's going to be the best bang for buck in terms of getting a given user to transact in my application. Then you also just have the question of scale or volume. So these numbers are average numbers or median numbers. But if you have both an iOS and an Android application, these numbers don't at all mean that you should only be putting your money into your iOS app because it's going to have better CPA. That's not the case. What you should typically be doing is driving, is potentially putting more money into iOS. But as you increase your scale, your CPAs are just going to go up just because of kind of basic economics. And so what you really want to be finding is that balance point where you're getting kind of similar and competitive CPAs for both iOS and Android.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's dig into some of the app category data. All right. Let's start with e-commerce. So, again, interesting data. The cost to acquire a user who makes a first purchase, $167. ITAs, the install to action from install to purchase, 2.3%. So, for marketers who have an e-commerce app, how should they evaluate this data?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, I'd say there's a few things to take into account when looking at these numbers. The first is that these are average or median numbers, and they're covering up, all of these numbers cover up tremendous variance. So the price you're actually going to pay to acquire a user who performs a purchase into your application is going to vary according to kind of many factors, both your the advertising, how optimized your campaign is, and definitely the nature of the product you're selling, the flow inside your application. All of those things, and so so in particular, for example, for an e-commerce application, if you're selling a product that's broad appeal, that's frequently purchased, then your kind of CPA is going to typically end up being a lot lower than if you're a very, let's say, niche fashion application and you have just a very narrow audience. But at the same time, of course, CPA is only kind of half of the story in terms of making this work for your business. The other CPA is that's the cost to acquire a user, but what you need to be comparing that to is of course sort of like the the value you're generating, and so like the lifetime value, the LTV of your user, which can sometimes be hard to measure. So kind of like other proxies such as like the sort of 12-month sort of ROI of a given user, or another way to think about it is just kind of the margin you're making on each transaction and how sticky each user is. If you can drive up the stickiness, or you can drive up the kind of the net revenue you're making on each transaction, then you can afford to pay a much higher CPA and still be growing your bottom line. And I guess like another point to that in that direction is that a lot of our we didn't cover it in this report, but a lot of our customers are making getting dramatically more return than these CPAs than what they're paying with these CPAs, typically because they have kind of very high sort of levels of repeat purchases. They'll have certain users who make sort of 20 purchases or kind of make extremely large volume purchases, which I guess also indicates that you shouldn't, especially for something like e-commerce, you don't necessarily want to be thinking about the typical user, about the average user, because very often it's the case that a small percentage of users will make up potentially the lion's share of your revenue, and so you should be willing to pay a kind of potentially a very high price to acquire those users, because they're going to make you so much more money back.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You know what, Jennifer just reminded me of something. For everybody who's on the webinar, we do have open questions. So within the control panel, if you click on questions, feel free to post questions. We will try to answer your questions throughout, but definitely at the end of the session, we will take some time to answer questions as well. So feel free to post questions, and we'll try to answer them throughout and at the end. So, all right, let's move on to social. So social data is really it's very intriguing. 88.4, we see an 88.4% install to registration rate. $8.11 for the first-time share to acquire a user who registers and shares the first time, and then we find that these users go on to share 19 times within the first 30 days post-install. So, from my perspective, it looks like app install ads are a great investment for social apps. What are your thoughts about this?
I mean, at a high level, I'd say absolutely yes. Kind of, social apps tend to get really good bang for their buck in terms of user acquisition. I mean, I think there's a few reasons for that. One is that, especially relative to the other apps in this study, social apps tend to be among the broadest appeal. They have they have sort of wide audiences they're going after versus other applications, which are often kind of much more niche. And then also another thing that kind of became very clear in the study is that social apps tend to have among the best optimized, the best engineered kind of funnels within their application. I think that they tend to have by far the lightest weight sign up process, kind of forms and procedures, even though they're requiring the same data as, let's say, kind of an e-commerce application does to sign up. They have much lighter weight much lighter weight user flow. And I mean, I think, to be honest, that kind of anybody who's producing apps has a lot to gain from just kind of downloading a few of the current sort of top or hip kind of social applications, just seeing kind of how well they do this, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned. At the same time, I'd say that for social apps, they have perhaps the most kind of pronounced challenge in terms of determining kind of what their specific goal is. Among our customers, there's a wide variance in this. So some social apps are very clear that they're looking to drive users towards a transactional event. It's only a kind of actually, but less than 50% of the social apps in our study actually have a transactional event, which is why it doesn't show up in this funnel here. But the ones that do, they can kind of directly optimize. Obviously, the metric care about whether people are making a purchase or whether people are ROI positive in the short term, because that's going to come in the longer term. But what you do care about is that you're kind of increasing the sort of the value of your application and the value of sort of the underlying social network by having users, who share content, who invite people. And so in that case, you're going to be looking to kind of optimize potentially both either the kind of the CPA of acquiring a user who shares, or just the sheer volume of sharing and invitations. And then and then finally, for some of the applications in our study, their goal is simply to they're fairly early stage as businesses, and they're just looking to to improve their product to optimize their sign up process, or optimizing their sharing flow. And so it's very it's just beneficial to them to be able to have a constant flow of 1,000, 10,000 users, 10,000 users a day who can be running through that, and let's be optimizing for that. And so just having a good constant flow of users is just valuable to them in that way. And so yeah, I'd say that again, these numbers are the average numbers, but there's many different goals behind that.
Yeah, really good. Great. Let's talk about travel apps. So again, very interesting data. When I look at this, the big thing that jumps out to me is there's just a tremendous, we saw a tremendous range in the cost per reservation. It's not on the slide, but in the report, you'll see that we found that the cost to acquire a user who goes on to make a reservation ranges anywhere from $20 to $400. Why? What's going on? Why do we see such a big range?
Yeah, huge range. I think the primary, the primary reason is just the tremendous range in the kinds of products that are actually being reserved or being sold here. So travel in this study, it encompasses everything from very fairly lightweight things, such as just booking a taxi, which is something that most people will do on a whim, and need to do many times, sometimes many times per day, and it goes all the way up to booking a hotel room, booking a vacation, booking an international plane ticket, which is if you're buying a plane ticket for $2,000, that's obviously a lot harder to acquire a user who's gonna do that. And so I think that explains the broad range, the price, also the frequency of purchase and level of planning required. So booking a taxi, when you want a taxi, you need to do it in the moment, so you're going to do it by whatever means necessary, and whatever application that happens to fall under your hand on your mobile device. Whereas if on the contrary, and you'll be very receptive to advertising, for example, if on the contrary you're looking to book an international plane ticket, that's something that's typically that most people are going to invest a bit of planning into. They might well be a cross-device sort of thing. I think there we see a lot of discover online but discover on mobile but purchase on the web behavior, which of course actually if you take that into account, it can potentially lower these CPAs quite a bit. If 50% of people who are installing your application are actually purchasing online, then your effective CPA is probably is half of what these numbers indicate. And these numbers, we only included transactions that occurred on mobile, within the mobile app.
I fall into that category.
Yeah, there you go. Good example.
Research on my phone, on apps, purchase online.
Yeah, that's right. Same for me. But but that's of course not that's not decreasing the value of mobile. On the contrary, it's serving as a platform for discovery for you. And I guess the other thing though that goes into this tremendous variance is once again the amount of friction in applications. I think we found that when looking at the study, there's the stark variance based on how expensive the product is, but also how compelling the user experience is, how compelling the UX is, and in particular, very often companies that are mobile first. And have invested, have built up that mentality around having a very compelling and simple mobile user flow, have much better CPAs. Whereas if on the contrary, an application is simply directly reproducing what's done in the online world, you know, heavy kind of like sign-up flows, checkout flows, etc., then the CPAs tend to be much higher, even for kind of basically the same product. And so, you know, that's definitely sort of, I guess, something that's actionable. Yeah, that's right.
That's a very big consideration. In fact, it's a perfect segue into talking about how marketers can improve the performance of their app install campaigns. Because what you're speaking to here is, I mean, as we know, we've seen it as consumers as well as people that work in the industry. We know very well that you know, improving the flow, improving the app experience can directly impact conversion rates, can directly impact ROI. So, you know, love to get your perspective on, you know, what do you see as 3 or 4 best practices that you would share, you know, for people on the webinar that could have an immediate positive impact on the campaigns that they're running?
Oh gosh, I mean, this could be a webinar or 5 webinars in and of itself. But let me see. I think the sort of probably the kind of the most important thing, which actually surprisingly few sort of kind of mobile application companies are really kind of answering in a meaningful way is, what is it that you care about? Kind of when you say performance of my app install campaign, like what are you optimizing for? What is the performance that you care about? And sort of very, and I think, you know, maybe just because it's an easy metric to measure, or because it's kind of what the sort of the industry, or at least the advertising industry, has focused on, at least until now, is CPI, cost per install. And kind of, you know, and so a lot of people sort of, I think, kind of have in mind that the primary metric that they should be trying to sort of optimize is cost per install. And that, you know, it's possible that could be what you care about. Like if, for example, you're, you know, looking to just sort of climb the charts, or you kind of, or this is some sort of, you know, some metric that's passed down from on high. That could be what you're trying to optimize for. But most of the time, it's not. You know, most of the time, what you want is to improve your bottom line, is to drive revenue and also sort of, you know, profit and margin for whatever with whatever product it is you're selling, and so kind of defining that, and then defining that goal, which is, you know, very often, okay, a CPA, kind of you're optimizing for bringing in people who actually purchase in your application, or maybe it's kind of actual, you know, long-term revenue, or CPA, so actually sort of, you know, trying to optimize the kind of the cost to bring in a given dollar of revenue. So really sort of defining that, and then kind of optimizing your campaign to get that to be as good as possible is I think really key. It's something that's surprising. If you do that, then you're already kind of well ahead of kind of, you know, most companies in the space.
Right. So here's what I hear you saying. Right now, I mean, we all know this, but, you know, as an industry, everybody, you know, most companies and most marketers have been focused on the install. We're buying on the install. We're optimizing against the install. Yet the install is really just at the top of the funnel. It's just the first action that a user needs to take before they can get to the point where they will actively engage with an app and convert against a particular, you know, whatever that key action is for users. And so what you're suggesting is, number one, optimize your campaigns not just against that install, but optimize your app and your campaigns against that action that you want people to take once they install the app.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, you know, be clear about that, and then stick to it. And so, you know, once you have that goal defined, then you know, then you can proceed in a kind of pretty sort of systematic fashion. So so I think kind of, you know, from that point, the key thing is to take sort of a holistic view at the full kind of funnel that through which users are going, and in particular looking both before the install. So what's causing users to actually come into your application, and then also after the install. You know, what is that kind of engagement that you're sort of caring about and optimizing for that? And so sort of I'd say some of the, like, you know, the key elements that are kind of people often sort of neglect to fully think through or fully optimize are one, the kind of the marketing messaging, and the advertising creatives that you're using to reach out to users. That's the first experience that the user has of your application. And so, you know, you need to both stand out, but also to be consistent with the rest of the funnel. You know, if you're if you're using some messaging or some hook that's not then kind of reflected on the App Store page or in your application, the user's going to drop off later in the funnel, even if they click on the ad. Also on mobile, the vast majority of advertising inventory is sort of classic display inventory, tiny banners at the bottom of the screen or kind of interstitials that are displayed very briefly. So what works in the online world doesn't necessarily work in those contexts. You want to have kind of a compelling experience, and so having some sort of good UX, good technology, whether it's sort of like animation, interactivity, etc., can have a big impact. The next step in the funnel, which people really, I think, neglect the importance of, is the App Store page. With a mobile application, every single user who's ever going to install your application is going to go through the App Store page and is going to actively decide, do they want to install your application or not, based on that information. And so, we could have an entire webinar on this, but I'd say a few key elements or a few best practices are have a very clear value proposition. People are going to take a decision in a few seconds, sometimes even less. And so you want it to be clearly, very clear, kind of what they're going to get from installing your application. Keep it short and sweet. A few kind of a one-line hook is a lot more valuable than a multi-paragraph feature list, which is all too often present. Also, the rating is extremely important. We found that applications with less than a 4-star rating, or even worse, less than a 3-star rating, will often halve their conversion rate relative to a kind of the same application with a much better rating. And so that's something you can improve, right? If ever you have a bad update of your application out there and you've got a 3-star rating, because on iOS they just show the rating for the latest update, immediately push an update and consider that a kind of hair on fire problem. And then finally, once you're inside the application, once the user's inside the application, sort of as we've been talking about throughout, I think the number one thing to keep in mind is friction. So just kind of go through your own application's flow and look for any opportunity to make it easier for the user to advance to the next stage. So whether it's in the sign-up form, often that's a kind of very bad offender. Make it as lightweight as possible. Don't require double typing the password. Don't require the user's address or information that's not relevant at that point. You can even request that later on when the user's already more engaged. We usually see tremendous drop-off rates from install to registration in applications that have a poorly optimized sign-up flow. If you're trying to lead the user to some sort of purchase, then optimize the hell out of your checkout process. Make it as lightweight as possible. If you're requiring, it's just physically difficult to enter in like a 16-digit credit card number and a full kind of home address and all that information onto a phone. So sort of ideally, accept multiple payment options, accept the lightest weight ones. Those things, they're actually fairly easy to apply, but they make a tremendous difference to whether or not the user actually makes a purchase.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Great. We've got a few questions here from our webinar attendees. So let me read the first one. Let's see. Do you have any CPA data on targeting existing users to download an app versus targeting new users?
Oh, this is a great question. So, I guess just to rephrase it a bit in terms of the standard industry terms, I guess the question is, how does CPA compare between new user acquisition for an application and for re-engagement? So pulling existing users of your application back into the app and hopefully having them make a purchase, either make another purchase or make a first purchase if they've never actually purchased. So we don't currently have I'd say generalized shareable stats around this. This is something we're really looking forward to doing in an upcoming report. we actually just recently kind of ourselves, Liftoff, we've started rolling out re-engagement to many of our customers. It's been going very well. It's very promising. I mean, I'd say in general that's the kind of it's a really compelling path. You know, if a and can yield very good CPAs. We'll get in our early experiments, we're finding that kind of CPAs can be very compelling, and it's intuitive. Why? Because a user who's already demonstrated that they want to install your application and want to interact with it, of course they have a much higher sort of probability of wanting to interact with it in future than just some kind of some person out, just some random person out there. At the same time, of course, very often the challenge with re-engagement is scale. So if you've got let's say you have a pretty successful application and you've got 1 million users. Well, that's 1 million users versus kind of 500 million who new potential users that you could be kind of reaching out to on iOS or on Android, and so kind of usually you end up kind of wanting a sort of a combination of the two, so you can get the sort of the scale of new user acquisition, potentially at a higher CPA or potentially at a lower CPA if you kind of really tweak down your bids, and also re-engagement of your existing users.
Yeah, that's good. All right, let's take another question here. Oh, we got quite a few. Let's see. What is the CPA for getting existing users to install our app and go mobile versus trying to find users in the wild via the mobile app and getting them to sign up with your product and use your mobile app? It sounds like a very similar question.
I mean, maybe what the intent of the question here is kind of pulling users from online, existing users into mobile. I mean, I'd say in general that's something that tends to be a very a good strategy. Sort of if you have a very strong existing user base in the online world, then promoting your application to those users via through the channels you have. Typically that's email campaigns, that's any sort of news feed or functionality you have in your website. That's a strong growth path, and that's how many of the largest applications today kind of made their initial entry. So that's how Facebook became kind of the #1 application, was obviously just converting their online users over to their mobile application. At the same time, I'd say that one kind of the behaviors of users in the online, of even the same user in the online context and the mobile context tend to be very different. People consume content or user experiences in very different ways. So sort of do take that into account and don't assume that kind of what works online is going to work on mobile. And then secondly, one of the kind of fantastic things about the mobile app ecosystem is that it's just such a large audience of users who can engage with your application, and so sort of it tends to be a sort of tremendous expansion opportunity as well.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, I'm going to take one more question. Let's see. Actually, maybe we'll take two more. The next question: do you have any info on how these benchmarks change between the U.S. and international markets?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So these, that's a great question. So we do we didn't cover kind of sort of, I'd say, geographic variation in this report. That would actually be a great topic for a future report. These numbers are we actually restricted the data set to the kind of US and Europe US, Canada, Europe, and I think Australia in this data set, just to avoid having sort of too much variance. So if you're looking at these numbers, think I guess US, Europe. We actually run campaigns in, I think, most kind of major countries around the world and on just about every continent. And typically CPAs, especially on Android, tend to be quite a bit lower in kind of more sort of emerging markets in parts of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and On iOS, that's a bit less the case, typically because they tend to be kind of just one, there's less iOS penetration in those markets, and two, they tend to be kind of and the inventory just tends to also be expensive on iOS users. Yeah, that's a great question. I'd love to cover that in future reports.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, I'm going to take one more question here. This is a very good one. What's the quickest way to identify the best network if you've got a limited budget for testing campaigns?
Ooh, gosh.
Other than searching Quora.
Yes. I think like I think it comes down once again to what your goal is. So when you I think when one first looks at the kind of the world of mobile user acquisition or mobile advertising or mobile marketing, there's a bewildering array of options. And but really kind of when you when you look a bit closer, they fall into a few major buckets. So you have incentivized advertising is one, with the Tapjoy and other companies in that category. You have what I call classic display ad networks, kind of like the AdMob, the iAd, companies like that. You have the major social players. You have kind of Facebook, Twitter, etc. And then you have and then there are kind of a few companies of Liftoff's category that are doing more of this higher level like optimization take. And so if you just want to if you've got a limited budget, then define what your goal is. If you genuinely just want people to install your application and that's all you care about because that's for whatever reason the metric you've decided on, then like incentivized installs, which essentially means kind of basically giving the user a kind of some like reward in kind of either like monetary or in kind of coins and whatever application they're using to install your application, then that's going to be the cheapest way to get installs. If on the contrary you care more about some post-install engagement metric, like you're looking to drive purchases in your e-commerce application, I mean, then to be honest, I think that's that's what we built Liftoff. That's what we built Liftoff to service and to optimize for.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any other questions? Okay. Harry, thank you very much. That was great. I appreciate the time. Thank you everyone for attending. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. Of course, you can visit our website, and we will post the recording to our website if you want to share it out. That should be live sometime today or tomorrow. Thank you very much. Everyone, have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.